The job market has changed since the pandemic, and so have the rules.
What worked 3 years ago no longer works. There's so much more noise out there and so much contradictory advice.
We're here to help you cut past the noise and decode the new rules.
And to guide you to your next opportunity. We're going to give you our shared expertise and help you figure out how to make the most of this post-pandemic talent market.
So join us on this journey if you're open to work.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, James.
We already talked about the origin story of why we're doing this and why we called it Open to Work. But the fact is, you and I are both open to work. So maybe we should start, or maybe you should start by telling us what your job search has looked like up until this point.
So as I mentioned in my last in our last conversation, I wrapped up with my previous employer in kind of September, October in 2023, and kind of for me it's interesting because Procore was a 5,000 person business and was more kind of the largest business that I'd ever been a part of, and I really enjoyed working at that sort of scale. But my background has always been startups, and I was starting to, and smaller businesses that are kind of were sub 100 people or sub 500 people when I joined, and so I was thinking a lot about like what is it that I really enjoyed about the work that I was doing, which type of business that I really feel like I kind of had the most impact in, and so I kind of going down that road, I started to, and what is it that I wanted to kind of get out of my career really as well, and so. The first thing that I kind of started to look at is the size of business is actually not that important to me. What I love is the challenge of going into a business that is having recruiting transformation issues and is looking to solve problems with recruiting and people at the heart of it. And that's like kind of been the consistent theme in every single job I've ever done, is that we've got a problem. We don't really know what it is. Can you come in and help us? We think it's with our recruiting operation, and that's where I've been able to come in. And so what I like is when there's a certain level of maturity already in. They already value what TA can do to the organization. They're wanting to bring in a serious TA leader, and they've probably been through like their first kind of iteration of what the talent function looks like, and they're now looking for someone to take them on their next level of that journey, especially if it's a smaller business, or going through kind of significant European transformations for US businesses. And I kind of spoken to a variety of businesses that are in both camps of that. But yeah, and then think culturally, I want to work with really smart people. That's why I think that second stage of business is not that is really interesting to me, because you have people who have seen the movie before. You're typically hiring your next level of senior leaders within a business that have a certain level of maturity to the work that they've already done in their career, rather than doing it for the first time. There's a great mix of startups doing things for the first time and the great energy that comes with an early stage business, but then also the experience and capability and maturity that comes with a slightly more established kind of leadership team. Yeah. So in summary, when I look at a business, I sort of am looking for the team, the size of the business and the opportunity that's ahead of them. So am I going to be working with really, really smart people? How big is the opportunity that they're trying to attack, and how big is the transformation and within the TA organization?
So if there are any chief human resources officers or any chief people officers that happen to be listening to this, you should absolutely hire Matt, is what we're saying.
But how about you? I'm sure you'll have a much more cleanly articulated, having done this exercise with you before, I'm looking forward to your very well articulated response for what you're looking for.
The short version is, having done this for 20 years now and viewing my career kind of in two halves. The first decade spent in a startup that got really big, and the second decade spent in corporate America. I'm looking for the Goldilocks opportunity. It needs to be something large enough where it makes sense. I don't need to go back necessarily to leading a team of 100 recruiters, but probably leading a team of 2 is probably too small. So it needs to be an organization at a certain size for it to make sense. Also, just to bring all the knowledge that I've accrued over the last decade, managing hiring at scale in a multinational, highly regulated, complex global environment. There's a lot of lessons you can learn from that are applicable to smaller scaling organizations.
Do you think that this market has changed how you think about what you're looking for?
I think not just the market. I think because of the journey that I have been on, the car accident and everything that happened afterwards was such an intense inflection period that it really made me reassess all of my values and what matters and how I want to spend my time and who I want to spend my time with and the type of energy I am willing to allow into my life. And I, yeah, it has to be the right environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Life is too short.
I completely agree, and I think one of the things that we'll talk about perhaps at some point in this podcast is this idea of like, how do you give yourself the security of these sorts of side hustles, and how do you make sure that you have the stability from an income that enables you to make the right long-term choice? And I think that, you know, potentially we're both in a position where we can wait for the right thing, and some people aren't. And the psychology of what that means when you've been out on, even you know, when you've been on market for a bit of time and you're kind of continuing to hold out, you know, do you start to compromise? At what point do you start to kind of change your perspective? And I think it affects everyone at some point. It's just kind of how long you can hold out almost, to that point where you you sort of have to make a decision.
When I'm coaching folks, I always say, don't be afraid to take a survival job. It doesn't need to go on LinkedIn. You don't need to talk about it. But if it means that you need to, you know, go back and work retail or go work in a restaurant just to bridge yourself between your last opportunity and the next opportunity, you should absolutely do that. There is no shame in doing that. And I think it's far better to do that and give yourself some income to buy yourself the time to wait for the next right opportunity than to get to the point where you just have to take something and it ends up being another toxic environment.
And it's such a good point. And we can move on to another topic, but as an example, I knew a head of TA who went this winter, and she wasn't working, and she went and worked in Santa's Grotto over the winter period because she wanted to make some money to be able to pay for, you know, Christmas and stuff and not go too deep into the savings. And, you know, we all have got to do what we've got to do at the end of the day. And you're absolutely right. I think we're both, I'm looking forward. I still am holding out for that right opportunity. And I think it's really important to try and find what you can to help to get yourself into a position so you can also wait, but you've got to do what's right for you.
Aldous and James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
So why don't perhaps you and I'm going to put you on the spot here. Why don't you start by describing just in very simple terms what LinkedIn is and why this is an important thing for us to talk about?
I'm so glad you're letting me go first because you know that I love LinkedIn. This podcast
sponsorship opportunities are available.
Yeah, I was going to say this is not yet sponsored by LinkedIn, but if you want to LinkedIn, LinkedIn is only 20 years old. I have been a user from almost the very beginning and a customer for at least 15 years. So I've been on the journey with LinkedIn right from the very beginning. As far as I'm concerned, there is no other technological advancement that has done as much to level the playing field and to truly follow their mission statement, which is to create economic opportunity for everybody in the global workforce. And what I mean by that is historically, crafting and fostering a professional network was the preserve of elite universities, alumni groups, professional societies, networking organizations, and yes, really, golf courses. And one of the, well, it depends who you ask, one of the unintended or intended consequences of that was the perpetuation of systemic and structural inequity, which is why leadership positions so often are filled by people that look like you and me because of the gatekeeping of opportunity. And what LinkedIn has done is give unparalleled access to everybody in the workforce, access and visibility to the leadership, both inside your organization and across your industry. And because of in recent years, the pivot from what LinkedIn used to be to what LinkedIn is today, i.e., the focus on the newsfeed and the focus on content, LinkedIn has essentially given you the opportunity to invite yourself to a seat at the table that might not otherwise have been granted. And so, as far as I'm concerned, it's not the only, but it is one of the most powerful tools in managing your own career. Maybe it's helpful to start by explaining how the ecosystem works and maybe bust some myths around what LinkedIn is and what LinkedIn isn't. And to your point, LinkedIn now has 1 billion members. 1 billion people are users of LinkedIn. The vast majority of those billion people are familiar with one version of LinkedIn, with the consumer-facing apps and website. There are multiple versions of LinkedIn. If you're in a sales or marketing function, there's a tool called LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which helps you figure out who are the right people inside an organization for you to prospect to. For us recruiters, there is probably the most powerful tool we have amongst all of the various different tools in our toolbox. Probably the most powerful tool we have is a product called LinkedIn Recruiter, which is essentially the world's largest candidate database. In that, for a regular user of LinkedIn, if you look for people on LinkedIn, you will be surfaced your first, second, and third degree connections. If I use LinkedIn as a recruiter, I can literally see the whole billion. I can see every single user of LinkedIn. So it is an incredibly powerful outreach tool to help me and my teams figure out how teams inside organizations are structured and who is doing what. And it allows us to get directly in touch with them. And I think so many folks lose sight of that fact, that by properly managing your LinkedIn presence, you make yourself more discoverable to recruiters, which, even if you're not looking for a job right now, will be useful for you throughout your career. So at a minimum, you want to be properly curating your static presence on LinkedIn. Advanced is engaging with content or creating content, but I would suggest table stakes career management is making sure your profile and presence is properly populated, because that's what's going to make the difference to making you more discoverable to recruiters that are looking for talent.
Yeah. So we have, I think, from like a job seeker's perspective, then we sort of have maybe 3 different things we need to think about when we're looking at LinkedIn. One is the job adverts that we get seen. So we need to ensure that we're one is the job ads. The second is the recruiters that are potentially going to reach out to us. That's either within a business like Nike or Procore, or recruiting agencies that are working on on commission for hiring for businesses, and then the third would be for the general network that could potentially engage with your kind of product and your activity on LinkedIn and say, hey, I want to partner with you and I want to work with you because what you're writing and what you're putting out there is really interesting to me. And that could be a hiring manager for a role perhaps, or it could be Forbes, who reached out to you about your content, right? So it's important to bear in mind these personas perhaps as we're building content and as we're building our profile of who could be reviewing it at any given time. So perhaps then we should start with talking about like how to make a good profile on LinkedIn, right? Like the idea of having a static profile that is well built is the table stakes for anyone who's using the LinkedIn platform and any job seeker really. And under that assumption, what do you think would be kind of your core recommendations? And perhaps we can also think about how it speaks to these three groups as well.
The advice I always give is I explain how recruiters are using the tool, and then we work backwards from there. And wherever possible, I use LinkedIn's own data to further illustrate the point. And there are many things I love about LinkedIn, but and I already spoke about this in a previous episode, because there are so many users conducting so much activity on the platforms, it generates a huge amount of data, and across the entire data set, LinkedIn can make very powerful inferences, which can then guide how you can best optimize your own usage of LinkedIn based on the outcomes that you want. Historically, recruiter searches on LinkedIn started the traditional way, which is either based on job title, company, keyword, or location. And what I mean by that is a search might have been framed looking for data scientists or data warehouse or extract, transform, and load being a skill or a keyword, or a location like San Francisco, or companies like data scientists from Meta, Google, Amazon. Those were typically the parameters that recruiters would use when trying to find subsets of candidates, because again, recruiters can see all billion users, so they have to manage down the subset of candidates they're reaching out to.
Mm-hmm.
That's changed somewhat in recent years, and whilst 60% of recruiter searches still start that way, now 40% of recruiter searches start with skills, and specifically the LinkedIn skills functionality. And so working back from those two data points, when you're populating your profile, you need to be capturing at least, if you've been working for more than a decade, you want at least the last decade's worth of positions to be captured. And by that, I mean, what was your job title and where? And ideally, for each position, 2 or 3 bullet points explaining what you were doing. But then against each of those positions, appending LinkedIn skills that are relevant to that position, so that you're making yourself available to both types of searches, so that you're discoverable by recruiters that are still looking for the keywords associated with the jobs that you did, and also with the skills that are associated with those jobs, which LinkedIn will help pre-populate based on their AI inference. But you want to be able to capture both so that you're more discoverable.
Because then on top of that, LinkedIn is also pushing you job ads that match to the skills that you and the job titles you currently have and you have had in the past. So it will serve you higher. It will more likely serve you jobs if you have that you're looking for, if you have the skills on there that are accurate against what you've done.
James, tell us about our American sponsor.
Many of the legacy ATS products don't use AI in any meaningful way, which is what is so innovative about mojohire.ai. It is an overlay that you can add to your existing ATS that helps you better discover candidates that are already there and reduces discovery time by up to 90%. Their comparative AI tool is a real game changer, and you can learn more at mojohire.ai.
And a classic error that I think I see when I'm doing coaching as well is not using traditional titles. And businesses do this when they post jobs online, and it's a classic error for them to get really low performing job ads. But also people do it when they describe themselves. You know, they'll say that they were a talent hacker or a software guru, and this just means that you're not coming up in searches. Use a very clear and well used and well documented job title that is representative of the level of job that also you're looking to apply for.
Let me give you some really great examples from the early years of Net-a-Porter, which was an e-commerce business. We used to call a job function retail coordinators, which was so counterintuitive on many levels because we didn't have any stores, so there was no retail. And what they actually were was assistant merchants. And before I got there, nobody in the business could understand why we weren't able to recruit the people that we wanted to recruit. And I was like, because nobody knows what a retail coordinator is, and what these people are is assistant merchants. They're assisting the merchandising team. Let's call it that. We'll be more successful. And of course, we were.
I think other kind of basic table stakes for building a profile, in addition to the skills and getting your kind of job history correct, just having a good picture that is, that is not just a kind of stock photo almost. And we've seen some pretty shocking ones out there. But ideally, you want like a semi-professional picture of you looking ideally at or near a camera, rather than a picture like of your dog or something that's too formal as well.
Profiles with pictures get 2x the views of those without. So if you don't upload a picture, you're reducing your chance by half of being discovered.
Yeah.
Because human beings like to look at human beings. That's just how we roll.
And so now that you've got your profile built, so we've put a picture on, we've come up with a good headline perhaps as well for extra points. We've put our job career history down there, including a couple of bullet points, and then we've also updated our skills. So we're good to go at this point. What do we do next?
Well, you don't have to do anything at all if you're not actively looking for a job. That is good enough to just be quietly visible to recruiters that you might want to be fostering long-term relationships.
We'll have a whole session on networking at some point, but what would be kind of your top 3 tips for becoming a kind of good networker on LinkedIn?
Sure. This is really easy and far less complicated than people think. And so I always say, go where it's warm. True in many areas of life, but especially in trying to network. So figure out in your industry or sector, which are the 5 to 10 companies that either you would really like to work at or are really doing the most in your industry. Which businesses are really leading the way and are they movers and shakers that the press talks about and the industry talks about? Then figure out who in those businesses is posting the most, and LinkedIn will help you do this. So you're trying to figure out who is spending the most time on LinkedIn. You're going where it's warm. Once you've identified who those people are, set notifications so that you don't miss their posts, because there is a lot of noise on LinkedIn, and you don't necessarily want to wade through all of the noise, but you want to make sure that that you're seeing the posts from people that are posting it from the places that you're interested in. And once you start getting their posts in your feed, start responding in a meaningful and additive way. Don't just say great post or thanks for the share. Only respond when you have something meaningful to add to the conversation, or a question to ask, or a refinement to the thought. And in that way, it's far easier than trying to come up with your own content. It's easier to respond to stuff that's already there. And in doing so, you are inviting yourself into the conversation. You're becoming part of the conversation amongst thought leaders in your industry and in your sector. It doesn't even matter if you're not looking for a job right now. It's a good practice just to become involved in that conversation.
Mm-hmm. And then if you were actually looking for a job, what's perhaps something that you'd recommend to kind of navigate your way towards your next opportunity?
Always go back to the data. On average, when I look at the data in aggregate at the end of the year, when I look at how we actually filled jobs inside the company, the data is almost always the same. 50% of our roles get filled by people applying for jobs. Roughly 30% get filled by people being referred by existing employees. And roughly 20% get filled by recruiters proactively going out and finding talent. Now, different parts of the organizations, those numbers change. Some areas of the organization is 100% sourced, and some areas is 100% inbound. But broadly speaking, across the enterprise as a whole, those numbers hold. So if you're looking for a job, you want to show up in each of those buckets, because then you get more chance of being hired, right? So applying online to open jobs is table stakes. Being discoverable by recruiters, so you're in that 20% bucket. But the real golden window is by being referred by someone that already works inside the organization. And I say that because definitely in larger organizations, there's often different protocols for folks that have been referred. Sometimes it's a fast track. Sometimes it's a guaranteed review by a recruiter. Whatever it is, there is often significant benefit to being referred by an existing employee. And that's why doing the hard yards, even when you're not looking, of networking and becoming part of the conversation with thought leaders, or even not just thought leaders, people that post a lot at companies that you want to work for.
Yeah.
If they've become familiar with your name because you've been regularly commenting on their stuff, they are more likely to accept a connection request, and then they are more likely to refer you to the job that you've already applied for. Now, I always say apply first, just so that you're in there, because you don't know that you're going to get a referral, but then reach out and ask to be referred.
Yeah. I guess if we were to summarize, and maybe slightly taking a different tact, what would be the top three things you'd recommend someone do on their LinkedIn today?
Go and look at your profile. Is it fully populated, at least for the last decade? Do you have 2 or 3 bullet points of information against every role that you've held, explaining what it is you did, where you did it, and the impact that you had, as far as is possible to share on something that's publicly facing? Sometimes you have to thread the needle a bit between what you can put on a resume versus what you can put on LinkedIn. Obviously, you can't share material, non-public information. And then look at the skills. LinkedIn allows you to use up to 50 skills across your profile as a whole. My usual rule of thumb is ideally you want 5 for every role that you've held. So assuming you've had 5 roles over the last, 10, 15 years, that's 25 skills. LinkedIn also allows you to append skills to your education and to any volunteer work that you do. So that allows you to surface perhaps different aspects of you as a fully rounded human being. So, perhaps skills that you picked up in college, or the volunteer work that you currently do in your community. That's another opportunity to paint a more fully rounded picture, all of which makes you more discoverable to recruiters.
Awesome. Well, look, this really interesting episode. So next week, and my cat's coming in here. This is Oscar, everyone.
Say hi to Oscar.
Say hi to Oscar. It's probably not the last time he'll appear in one of these podcasts. It's 5:30, so it's his food time. That's why he's here. Just so that everyone knows. But to wrap up, I guess. So next week, these episodes are going to come out weekly. Everyone, we're going to kind of tackle another kind of interesting topic as it pertains to people's job search. So stay tuned next week. I think we're going to be talking about resumes, and which is a meaty topic, which I think we'll not cover in one episode, and we'll continue to come back to. But James, where can we find you, and what are you doing next?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I spend far too much time there. And you can also check out I have a weekly column in Forbes, which is published every Wednesday. You can find me there too.
Awesome. And you can find me also on LinkedIn under Matthew Parker, and I have a website at matthewparkeradvisory.com. All right. Until next time. Thanks very much, James.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.